For 17 years, Jim Jordan acted like the law was his weapon until Jasmine Crockett shattered it all in just 15 minutes. He threw out false cases. She struck back with real receipts. The hearing turned into a live explosion no one could stop watching. What exactly did Jasmine do to expose Jim Jordan so completely? Hold tight, what you're about to see could rewrite history before your eyes. The chamber did not feel like Congress that morning. It felt like the air before a storm, heavy charge, waiting for a strike. Reporters whispered as though in a cathedral pens, hovering eyes darting between the Republican chairman and the freshman Democrat who had quietly stacked a mountain of papers at her desk. Jim Jordan leaned forward, sleeves rolled, voice vibrating with fury. His words cracked through the microphone. The Department of Justice has trampled on the Constitution from the First Amendment to the 14th. The words slammed across the hearing room like a gavel shattering glass. Staffers stiffened. Aides from the department exchanged nervous looks. It wasn't a statement. It was an accusation meant to shake the pillars of government itself. And then the camera swung to Jasmine Crockett. She did not flinch. Her hand brushed over the thick folder in front of her fingers, pressing the yellow tabs as if they were trigger points. Her eyes locked on Jordan, steady and unblinking. "Wrong law, wrong to the root," she said, her voice low, but cutting like a blade through fabric. "And today I have evidence." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thunder held in the clouds, the pause before lightning tears the sky. Every head in the gallery turned. Even veterans like Zoe Lofgren and Jerry Nadler leaned forward, sensing the impossible, that Jim Jordan's dominance might finally crack. The storm had arrived. The chamber still trembled from Crockett's interruption, like glass rattling after a lightning strike. To grasp why the silence was so heavy, one had to look beyond the microphones and polished wood to the two lives now colliding under the nation's gaze. Jim Jordan. The name alone carried the swagger of 17 years in Congress. Before politics, he had been a wrestling coach, shouting across sweaty gym floors, drilling his athletes in brute force. That same style became his political weapon: overwhelm, interrupt, dominate. He built a reputation as the Republican Party's relentless interrogator. No notes, no hesitation, no mercy. Conservative media crowned him the bulldog of Capitol Hill. His fundraising emails bragged about his takedowns. But there was a secret woven into the legend: Jordan had never practiced law. He carried a law degree but never passed the bar, never stood before a judge to argue a case, never shouldered the weight of a client's fate. His expertise was performance, not precedent. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. The contrast was jarring. She had walked into Texas courtrooms, where the air reeked of fear, where every misstep could destroy a family. A civil rights lawyer, she defended the poor, the wrongfully accused, the ones society forgot. Judge Lee Rosenthal once wrote that her cross-examinations cut through deception like a scalpel. She had seen juries wrestle with verdicts, seen mothers sob in the back row, seen the law's power to crush or to save. For Crockett, law was not theater. It was survival. And now here they were, a showman who wielded rhetoric like a weapon, and a litigator who carried scars of real battles. Jordan sneered, muttering into his microphone, "Courtroom scraps don't qualify her to lecture Congress." Crockett didn't flinch. She pressed her hand against the thick folder in front of her yellow tabs, like loaded rounds waiting to be fired. For the first time in years, Jordan's aura of invincibility flickered. This was no ordinary sparring match. It was the collision of two worlds, one built on spectacle, the other on truth. And America was about to witness which world would survive. The air inside the chamber grew heavier as Jim Jordan adjusted his microphone, eyes flashing with defiance. He didn't ease into it. He attacked like a man convinced the room already belonged to him. Brandenburg versus Ohio, he thundered, guarantees every single January 6th defendant the right to free speech. His fist struck the desk for emphasis, sending a hollow echo across the walls. Before anyone could react, he launched again. United States versus Nixon proves executive privilege is absolute. Presidents cannot be touched by political witch hunts. Gas flickered across the room. Even Representative Zoe Lofgren whispered, "That's not what Nixon said." Jordan pressed on, voice rising like a coach screaming at wrestlers. And the FBI, they shredded the Fourth Amendment with geofence warrants, spying on citizens, treating patriots like criminals. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on Jordan's reddening face, veins pulsing at his temple. This was the show they expected: the bulldog, the wrecking ball, the man who never stopped swinging. But at the end of the horseshoe sat Jasmine Crockett, silent, still, and deadly focused. Her pen tore across the page. Each citation Jordan barked met with a circle, a strike, an exclamation mark. She whispered under her breath, "Wrong, twisted, invented." Her chief counsel leaned closer. "Are you sure?" She tapped the folder in front of her. Dozens of statutes, cases, rulings marked with neon tabs. "He's misquoting the law in front of the entire country, and I'm going to prove it." Across the aisle, Merrick Garland's eyes narrowed. He too knew the holdings Jordan was butchering. Nixon did not defend privilege, it destroyed it. Brandenburg required likelihood as well as intent. And the Fourth Amendment courts had upheld those warrants time and again. The public at home only saw Jordan's fire. To them, it looked like another easy victory. But inside that chamber, a trap was quietly being set. Crockett wasn't nodding along. She was loading ammunition, and when she fired, it would detonate live on national television. The storm that had been gathering finally broke when Jasmine Crockett turned her attention to the cornerstone of Jim Jordan's opening assault, Brandenburg versus Ohio. The chamber still echoing with his declarations quieted as she opened her folder with deliberate precision. The soft rustle of pages carried more menace than his shouts. For 17 years, Jordan had leaned on the image of authority, tossing out case names like a boxer throws jabs, confident no one would challenge the substance behind them. Brandenburg was one of his favorites, the shield he held up whenever he wanted to excuse dangerous speech as harmless political expression. And for 17 years, no one had stopped him mid-swing. Until now. Crockett traced her finger down the highlighted passage, every movement measured. Around her, the tension grew unbearable. Reporters leaned forward, eyes flicking between her steady hand and Jordan's taut frame. The entire country, watching through flickering screens, could feel the pause before impact. "What year was Brandenburg decided?" Crockett asked, flipping through her folder. Jordan shot back, 1969. "Everyone knows that." His smirk drew scattered chuckles from his side of the aisle. Crockett nodded slowly. "Good. And what exactly did the court hold in that case?" Jordan leaned into the microphone, voice booming. "That inflammatory speech is protected unless it's directed to inciting imminent lawless action." He spoke the line like a rehearsed chant, certain that his authority would shut her down. But Crockett wasn't finished. She raised a page marked in neon yellow, her voice slicing through the tension. "That's close, Mr. Chairman, but not correct. The court said speech is protected unless it is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action." The added phrase, "likely to incite," hung in the air like a guillotine. Reporters gasped. Staffers from the Department of Justice exchanged looks. Reporter Jerry Nadler scribbled something on his pad and slid it toward Zoe Lofgren. He missed the likelihood requirement. Crockett's voice sharpened. "That missing word is not a detail. It's the line between protest and insurrection, between harmless rhetoric and criminal conspiracy." "You left it out, Mr. Chairman." "On purpose or by ignorance?" Jordan's face darkened. "The gentle lady is nitpicking." Crockett's reply cut like glass. "Nitpicking, tell that to Judge Learned Hand, who wrote that words can become acts when they create a clear and present danger. Tell that to the families who watched violence erupt on January 6th. They know the difference between words and a mob." Merrick Garland, silent until now, shifted forward. Though restrained by protocol, even he couldn't hide the flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Jordan's knuckles whitened on the desk. His voice cracked. "This is theatrics," no. Crockett shot back. "This is the law. The thing you claim to defend but clearly misunderstand." The chamber fell into stunned silence. For the first time in years, Jim Jordan looked less like a warrior and more like a man cornered by his own mistakes. And everyone watching knew this was just the opening shot. The air in the chamber was brittle, as though one wrong breath might shatter it. Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone not to shout, but to dissect. Her words moved like scalpels exposing the rot beneath Jim Jordan's performance. If Jordan's interpretation of Brandenburg were accepted, every speech, no matter how reckless, would be untouchable. A rallying cry to storm the Capitol protected. A call to hunt down officials safe. The standard Jordan presented stripped away the only safeguard the court had built: the requirement that words must not only intend to spark lawlessness, but be likely to succeed. Without that, Crockett explained, a society has no defense against the weaponization of speech. Incitement becomes invisible, unstoppable, a poison, masquerading as free expression. The gallery stiffened as her analysis landed, because this was no longer an abstract fight over case law. It was a warning of what happens when truth is edited to serve power. Reporters scribbled with furious intensity. On CNN's live feed, the Chiron shifted Crockett, Jordan's interpretation. All incitement legal. The absurdity was undeniable. Even conservative stalwarts like Rep. Ken Buck shifted uneasily in their seats. They knew the dangers of erasing that single clause. Without it, the law would give shelter to chaos, leaving courts powerless to rein in the very violence Jordan's allies had unleashed. Crockett's tone was steady, but her words struck like a hammer. If likelihood doesn't matter, then Adolf Hitler's speeches in the 1930s were constitutionally untouchable. If likelihood doesn't matter, then no jury can ever convict a man for riling up a mob. If likelihood doesn't matter, then January 6th was just a parade and not an attempted overthrow of government. The shockwave of that comparison silenced even Jordan's allies. The imagery was too raw, too undeniable. Judge Lawrence Tribe, watching remotely, would later tweet, "Crockett is right. Without the likelihood requirement, free speech doctrine collapses into absurdity." Inside the chamber, Jordan's jaw clenched so tightly it seemed his teeth might crack. He tried to laugh it off, muttering about democratic exaggeration, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Crockett had taken his omission and magnified it into a national question. Was Jim Jordan defending free speech or giving license to insurrection? The hearing no longer felt like politics. It felt like the first draft of history. The gallery sat frozen, the echoes of Crockett's warning still vibrating in the air. She leaned forward, her words landing like strikes to the ribs. Without the likelihood requirement, she pressed every chant, every threat that poured across these steps on January 6th becomes untouchable. You're telling this country that shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," is nothing more than a parade of opinions. The room jolted. Gasps erupted from the back rows. Reporters nearly dropped their pens. It wasn't theory anymore. It was blood glass and smoke reborn inside the hearing room. Jordan's jaw locked, but his silence betrayed him. Crockett seized the pause, each syllable dripping with fury. Protected speech. Tell that to Officer Brian Sicknick's family. Tell it to the officers crushed against barricades. Tell it to the teachers, the nurses, the workers who sat in front of their televisions and watched democracy trampled under boots. Her hand slammed a folder onto the desk. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Your version of the law doesn't defend freedom. It licenses mobs. It doesn't protect dissent. It protects destruction. Jordan tried to sneer, but the tremor in his voice betrayed weakness. You're exaggerating. Exaggerating. Crockett's eyes blazed. I practiced law for 15 years, Mr. Chairman. I've seen words turn into weapons. You've seen it too. You just refuse to admit it because admitting it shatters the empire you built on lies. Silence drowned the chamber. On live television, millions of Americans leaned forward, breathless, knowing this was no longer about abstract doctrine. It was about whether the man leading the Judiciary Committee was defending liberty or shielding insurrection. And Jasmine Crockett made it plain Jim Jordan's distortion wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the chamber itself had stopped breathing. Jasmine Crockett did not waste a second. From the stack of documents at her side, she pulled a single sheet marked with a bright red tab. The number at the top blazed like a warning flare. 18 USC Parser 1512. She held it high enough for the cameras to capture. This she announced, voice low, but sharp as the statute the chairman keeps invoking. The words on the page were not obscure. They were plain, unflinching. Whoever corruptly obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding shall be fined or imprisoned. Nothing about shredding papers. Nothing about burning files. Just obstruction, full stop. Crockett lowered the document, her gaze fixed on Jordan. Yet time and again you've told this country it requires destruction of evidence. You've repeated it on Fox News, in letters to the Attorney General, even in speeches here in this room. That, Mr. Chairman, is a fabrication. The reaction was electric. Reporters in the gallery snapped their heads toward Jordan. Phones lit up as tweets exploded across the internet. Judge Lawrence Silberman's name trended instantly after legal analysts quoted his past, ruling affirming that obstruction is not limited to evidence tampering. Jordan shifted, tugging at his yellow tie, but the pressure only grew. Crockett pressed harder, each word dropping like a hammer blow. By your logic, rioters smashing windows and halting certification of an election didn't obstruct Congress because they weren't destroying documents. Do you hear how dangerous that is? Gasps rippled across the chamber. Staffers exchanged frantic notes. Even seasoned members like Zoe Lofgren leaned forward, eyes wide. The absurdity was undeniable. Under Jordan's theory, a mob could storm the Capitol, beat officers, occupy the Senate floor, and it wouldn't count as obstruction unless they lit paper on fire. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The statute itself screamed louder than any speech. This law was written to protect the very process we are sitting in right now, she said, and you've twisted it until it's unrecognizable. Jordan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the desk, but no words came. His silence was louder than any rebuttal. Across America, viewers saw it unfold in real time, the self-styled warrior of the Constitution, exposed by the very code he had pretended to master. The first crack had become a fissure, and Crockett wasn't finished breaking him open. The chamber didn't just react, it convulsed. Reporters fired off tweets as though the building itself were on fire. One read aloud in the gallery, "Crockett nails Jordan live misquotes federal statute in front of millions." Gasps rolled through the rows like an aftershock. Jordan, however, sat back in his chair, forcing his jaw to unclench. His fingers tapped the desk with practiced composure. When he finally leaned into the microphone, his tone was deceptively calm. "Gentle lady from Texas," he said, "is free to play law professor. But the American people know obstruction means something more than words. It means real destruction." Crockett's reply landed like shrapnel. Real destruction? The statute says nothing about shredders or bonfires. It says obstructs official proceedings, period. The only thing being destroyed here is your credibility. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Phones lit up again, MSNBC's Katie Fang Crockett. The only thing destroyed is Jordan's credibility. Brutal. Jordan smiled faintly, a flash of his wrestler's grin. "You want to lecture me on credibility? I've chaired this committee for years. You've barely warmed your seat." Crockett didn't flinch. She raised the statute again, the paper trembling, not from her hand, but from the tension rippling through the chamber. "Chairman, you can wave your seniority like a flag, but it won't change the ink on this page. The law is the law, and today the entire country sees you misrepresented it." For a moment, the silence was suffocating. Merrick Garland shifted in his seat, lips pressed tight. Zoe Lofgren scribbled 2 words on her pad and slid it toward Nadler. "She's winning." Jordan straightened his voice, a controlled blade. "The gentle lady is twisting my intent." Crockett leaned closer to the mic, her words deliberate, lethal. "Intent. That's rich. You've repeated this false version of 1512 on national television in official letters in this very chamber. That's not the intent, Mr. Chairman. That's a pattern." Reporters jolted, typing furiously. The phrase flew online like a spark in dry brush. "That's not the intent. That's a pattern." The camera zoomed in on Jordan's face, still calm, but the stillness looked less like control and more like a man refusing to drown in front of millions. The public could feel it. This was no stumble, no accidental slip. Jasmine Crockett had exposed something deeper, and the storm was just beginning to break. The chamber grew colder as Jasmine Crockett pressed forward. She no longer spoke in theory, she spoke in blood and bone. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice a blade, "misreading the law isn't harmless. Workers have lost jobs. Veterans have been dragged through hearings. Fathers, mothers, soldiers punished, not because they broke the law, but because someone like you twisted it." Jordan exhaled slowly, feigning calm. "You're reaching." Crockett's eyes narrowed. "Reaching?" asked the steel worker in Ohio, who was fired after an OSHA rule was misapplied. Ask the Marine in Texas who spent months fighting a phantom regulation. Ask the union steward in Milwaukee whose career stalled because someone decided a misdemeanor was a felony. These are not hypotheticals. These are Americans whose lives collapsed because leaders treated words as toys. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. The gallery leaned in, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Every example hit like a drumbeat, louder, closer, impossible to ignore. Crockett drove the knife deeper. If misreading civil rules can destroy livelihoods, what do you think misreading criminal law does? It doesn't just take jobs, it takes freedom. It brands people as criminals. It tells them their country doesn't know the difference between protest and insurrection. Jordan forced a smile, but the cameras caught the tension in his eyes. His silence stretched too long, and in that silence, the weight of Crockett's argument thundered louder than any denial. She placed her hand firmly on the statute again, her tone final, unflinching. This isn't a slip of the tongue, Mr. Chairman. It's a betrayal of justice, and I intend to prove it was deliberate. The tension from Crockett's last words still clung to the air when she reached for a new document. The red tab at its edge glowed like a warning flare. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Mr. Chairman, she said evenly, you've relied on Thompson versus Louisiana to argue that warrantless searches are categorically unconstitutional. Do you recall your citation? Jordan straightened, forcing a calm exterior. Of course, he replied, measured, almost dismissive. Thompson versus Louisiana, a Supreme Court decision. It's clear precedent. Crockett let the silence hang before answering. Her eyes didn't leave his. The pause grew unbearable, and then she struck. That case law, she announced, each word cutting through the chamber, does not exist. The gallery erupted. Gasps whispered curses, the clatter of reporters' laptops. Even Merrick Garland's head lifted slightly, his expression caught between astonishment and grim satisfaction. Crockett pressed forward like a prosecutor cornering a hostile witness. I searched the Supreme Court's official reports. I combed Westlaw Lexis, every federal archive. There is no case called Thompson versus Louisiana that says what you claim. None. Jordan's face flushed, but he forced a thin smile. The gentle lady must be mistaken. She slammed the bound volume of United States reports onto the desk. The crack echoed like a gavel. Mistaken? Show me where it is, Mr. Chairman, because I checked the 1984 Thompson v. Louisiana, it deals with a crime scene search, not your claim. And Louisiana versus Thompson in 1990, jury instructions. Nothing remotely like what you told this committee. The blow landed with surgical cruelty. Reporters live-tweeted the revelation within seconds. Crockett, the case does not exist. Jordan visibly shaken. Crockett's tone sharpened her words a scalpel. You've been presenting phantom law to this body. You've been telling the American people about rulings that were never written, decisions that never happened. That's not advocacy, Mr. Chairman. That's fiction. The room pulsed with disbelief. Seasoned legislators stared, some in horror, others in awe. To fabricate precedent was more than an error. It was an unforgivable breach of trust. Jordan sat motionless, his calm mask beginning to crack. The silence that followed was worse than denial. Crockett leaned closer, delivering the final strike. If Thompson versus Louisiana never existed, then everything you've built on it collapses. And today the collapse is televised. The moment Jasmine Crockett declared this case does not exist, the chamber erupted like glass shattering. Reporters bolted upright, tweets firing like bullets. The phrase began racing across every screen. Crockett. Jordan cited phantom law. Jordan tried to steady himself, leaning back with forced calm. He spoke slowly, deliberately. The gentle lady exaggerates. Everyone knows what I meant. Crockett cut him down mid-sentence, her tone like a whip. No, Mr. Chairman. You told this committee on record that Thompson versus Louisiana barred warrantless searches. And I am telling you in front of God, the law, and the American people, it does not exist. The gallery gasped. Even seasoned staffers turned to one another in disbelief. Naylor leaned over to Zoe Lofgren and muttered, "She's ending him in real time." Jordan forced a thin smile, but his words faltered. The gentle lady is twisting context. Crockett fired back, slamming the bound reports onto her desk so hard the sound ricocheted like a gunshot. Show me the page. Show me the volume. Show me the ruling you built your argument on. You can't because it's fiction. MSNBC's Katie Fang live tweeted within seconds. Crockett to Jordan. Show me the page. You can't because it's fiction. Legal KO on live TV. The phrase legal knockout spread like wildfire, plastered across headlines before the hearing even adjourned. CNN ran it in all caps. Even Fox anchors looked rattled, forced to replay the clip. Crockett didn't gloat. She sat still, her silence sharper than applause. Jordan's calm mask was cracking under the weight of millions of eyes watching him squirm. This wasn't politics anymore. It was humiliation written into the record. And Jasmine Crockett had just delivered the blow that would haunt Jim Jordan's career forever. The echo of Crockett's blow had not yet faded when she turned her focus outward. Her gaze swept beyond the chamber, beyond the cameras, straight into the millions of homes watching. "Mr. Chairman's phantom law is not an isolated mistake," she said, her tone steady cold. "This is the oldest trick in politics: feed the public counterfeit facts, sell them as truth, and cash in their trust for votes." Her words detonated like thunder. The gallery leaned forward. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, capturing every syllable. She laid out the pattern. Jordan's repeated claims on cable news. His official letters to Merrick Garland peppered with citations that collapsed under scrutiny. His speeches at rallies where he presented fabricated case law as iron precedent delivered to crowds that roared with approval. Ordinary Americans, Crockett pressed, believed you. They believed the chairman of the Judiciary Committee must know the law. They repeated your words at kitchen tables, at union halls, at veterans' posts. They defended you online, not realizing they were defending smoke. The weight of that accusation filled the chamber. This wasn't about dusty law books anymore. It was about the people Jordan had persuaded with fiction's neighbors, workers, veterans, voters, weaponized by lies they thought were law. Jordan leaned into his microphone, forcing calm into his voice. "The gentle lady insults millions of Americans," Crockett struck like a hammer. "No, you insult them, Mr. Chairman, by feeding them poison and calling it patriotism, by building your brand on law you never bothered to check, by using fake facts as campaign slogans while the truth rotted in silence." The room was electric. Garland scribbled something on his legal pad. Later reporters would speculate it read, "Systemic deceit." CNN's Kyron updated Crockett, "Jordan fed America fake law to win votes." On Twitter, a clip of her words surged under the tag, "Fake facts for votes." The tension was unbearable. Veteran lawmakers sat stunned, some glancing at Jordan with visible unease. To invent a precedent was shocking enough. To frame it as a deliberate strategy to manipulate voters was radioactive. Crockett's final line carried no theatrics, just the gravity of a closing argument. "This is not sloppy lawyering. This is not a slip. This is a blueprint of deceit, and America deserves to know it." The gallery was still buzzing with Crockett's charge of fake facts for votes when she reached for her next weapon. Her voice dropped lower, more deliberate, like a surgeon about to cut. "For years, she began, the chairman has spoken as though he were the nation's foremost constitutional expert. He quotes statutes, he lectures witnesses, he berates attorneys, and he positions himself as the guardian of the law." She paused, letting the weight sink in. "But here's what the public doesn't know." She lifted a folder stamped with Jordan's academic history. The cameras zoomed in. The silence was suffocating. "Jim Jordan," she declared, "has never practiced law. He has never passed a bar exam. He has never stood in a courtroom on behalf of a client. Not once." The room erupted. Reporters gasped, some audibly. Katie Benner of the New York Times tweeted within seconds, "Crockett Jordan never practiced law, never sat for bar." Legal authority shattered live. Jordan's mask of calm cracked, if only for a blink. He leaned into the microphone with forced composure. "I have a law degree. Capital University Law School, 2001. "Everyone knows that." Crockett's response cut through like glass. "Yes, you graduated. But a degree is theory. Practicing law is reality. And reality means representing clients, filing motions, standing before judges. You did none of it. Zero." Gasps rippled through the chamber again. Nadler adjusted his glasses, unable to hide a grim smile. Even Merrick Garland raised his eyebrows, his usually stoic face betraying the shock of the revelation. Crockett pressed harder. "For 17 years, you've held yourself out as a legal authority. You've lectured this committee, you've preached to the American people. But you've never been tested in the crucible of a courtroom. Not once have you shouldered the burden of a defendant's life, or a victim's rights, or a family's future." Jordan forced a grin, trying to steady his voice. "This is irrelevant. The people elected me, not the Bar Association. But the damage was done. The public watching at home now knew the man barking about constitutional law had never carried the weight of it in practice. Crockett leaned back, her words precise, devastating. Law is not a prop for political theater, Mr. Chairman. It is a profession, and it's one you've never joined. The room was still rattling from Crockett's revelation when she leaned forward, her tone cutting deeper, colder. I practiced law for 15 years, she began, her words deliberate. When I got it wrong, my client went to prison. A mother lost her son. A family lost their income. The consequences of my mistakes were measured in human lives. Her voice did not rise. It dropped into a register that forced the chamber to listen. When you got it wrong, Mr. Chairman, you lost nothing but a few TV viewers. But today, when you get it wrong, the whole country pays the price. The gallery gasped. The blow was more than rhetorical. It was moral. Seasoned staffers froze, reporters scribbled furiously, and television anchors scrambled to rearrange their scripts. Crockett pressed on. Do you know what it's like, she asked, her tone almost reflective, to sit across from a client's mother and explain that her child won't be coming home because the law wasn't argued with precision? Do you know what it's like to look into the eyes of a man in an orange jumpsuit and know your misstep sealed his fate? She shook her head slowly. Of course not. You've never carried that weight. You've never shouldered that burden. You sit in this chair, you misquote statutes, you invent cases, and the damage is spread across millions of lives. Ordinary people, workers, veterans, teachers, they carry the consequences of your errors. Jordan inhaled sharply, but he stayed still, his calm facade faltering at the edges. Crockett's gaze hardened. That is the difference between us. When I was wrong, a single life suffered. When you are wrong, democracy suffers. The stakes are not the same, and that's why your arrogance is so dangerous. The chamber buzzed with whispers. Reporter Zoe Lofgren leaned over to Jerry Nadler and murmured, "She's putting him on trial before the whole country." Nadler only nodded. Crockett didn't stop. This isn't just about Thompson Vera's Louisiana not existing. It isn't just about twisting Paragraph 1512 into something it isn't. It's about trust. You've stood before cameras for years, wrapped yourself in the Constitution, and spoken as though you were the law itself. But every false claim you've made has chipped away at the very foundation you pretend to defend. Her words landed like iron nails. The cameras cut to Jordan's face, taut, flushed, yet still trying to project calm. He gripped the desk with both hands, a man trapped between pride and collapse. Crockett leaned into the microphone one final time, her voice steady, devastating. You're not just wrong, Mr. Chairman. You are dangerously wrong. And the price of your errors is not measured in ratings, not in sound bites, not in applause lines. The price is paid by this nation in chaos, in violence, in broken faith, and America can't afford to keep paying it. The silence that followed was unbearable. For the first time, Jim Jordan looked like a man standing on a collapsing stage. The silence from Crockett's last strike still lingered when the outside world erupted. Viewers across the country flooded social media with fury. One phrase cut through the chaos, typed again and again, until it was trending in red-hot capital letters. 17 years of cheating on Twitter hashtags detonated Jordan exposed fake law. 17 years of cheating, clips of Crockett's line. When I was wrong, a man went to prison. When he is wrong, the whole nation pays, surged across feeds replayed millions of times before the hearing even adjourned. In Cleveland, a bar full of veterans jeered at the television when Jordan's face appeared. In Houston, teachers on lunch breaks shook their heads in disbelief. In Detroit, a group of union workers shouted at the screen, "We've been lied to for years." The press corps caught the storm in real time. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times tweeted public reaction to Crockett's takedown as ferocious. Viewers accusing Jordan of 17 years of deception. MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell went further. The curtain has been pulled back. Jordan never argued a case, never passed a bar, and still lectured the nation. A fraud laid bare. Back inside the chamber, Crockett sharpened the blade. She didn't need to raise her voice. 17 years in this body, she said, 17 years of misstatements, distortions, and false authority. And today the people see it clearly. Jordan clenched his jaw, the calm facade cracking under the weight of millions of furious eyes. He leaned toward his microphone, his tone clipped cold. The gentle lady insults the voters who sent me here. Crockett shot back instantly. No, Mr. Chairman. You insulted them for 17 years. You stood before them as a man of the law when you were nothing of the kind. You sold them illusions. And now those illusions are collapsing. The words hung in the air, heavy and merciless. Television commentators called it historic in real time. CNN's Kyron blazed Crockett versus Jordan, 17 years of cheating. The clip replayed endlessly, the hashtags surging higher, the outrage snowballing by the minute. It was no longer just a hearing. It was a reckoning. And America had rendered its verdict before Jordan could even mount a defense. The fury online still blazed, hashtags climbing into millions. When Jasmine Crockett reached for the final weapon in her arsenal, the chamber seemed to sense it coming. Reporters leaned forward, cameras zoomed in, every microphone tilted toward her desk. Slowly, she lifted a heavy envelope, its seal broken, its contents thick. Her tone was deliberate, low, each word loaded. Mr. Chairman, for 17 years you've misquoted, distorted, and fabricated. The country now knows it. But today I submit evidence that the entire legal community has already judged you. She unfolded the first page. At the top, bold black letters, letter of concern, regarding misrepresentation of law before Congress. Below, 47 names, deans, scholars, and practitioners from institutions across the nation. Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, Stanford. 47 law professors. Crockett continued to have signed this document. 47 voices, Republican and Democrat alike, confirming that you have misrepresented statutes and violated the most basic standards of legal integrity. The gallery erupted in whispers. Some reporters audibly gasped. MSNBC's Ari Melber typed furiously, Crockett unveils letter from 47 law professors denouncing Jordan's misrepresentations. This is unprecedented. Jordan leaned forward, his calm mask slipping. Academics, he scoffed, forcing a grin, ivory tower elites who never face the voters. Crockett didn't flinch. Her voice rose sharp as steel. These are not ivory tower elites, Mr. Chairman. This is Professor Lawrence Tribe, who has argued before the Supreme Court more than any man alive. This is Judge Michael McConnell, appointed by a Republican president. This is Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of Berkeley Law. Giants in the law united in saying you lied. The blow landed with seismic force. Reporters' laptops clattered. CNN's Kyron updated in real time. 47 scholars, Jordan misrepresented basic law. Crockett pressed further, reading aloud. The chairman's repeated distortions undermine the rule of law, erode public trust, and constitute a violation of his oath of office. The words echoed like a sentence handed down from the bench. Jordan forced a chuckle, but it rang hollow. A letter doesn't change the will of the people. Crockett's reply cut the air. It changes everything, because the will of the people rests on trust, and you have shattered it. When 47 of the sharpest legal minds in America agree that your arguments are fabricated, the question isn't whether you can chair this committee. The question is whether you can be trusted at all. The room pulsed with tension. Staffers shifted in their seats. Veterans of Congress whispered that they had never seen a takedown so comprehensive, so final. Outside, the outrage multiplied. Twitter lit up with the tag Letter of 47. Millions of Americans shared the clip of Crockett holding the signatures high, her voice steady, relentless, undeniable. For 17 years, Jim Jordan had ruled by bluster. Now, 47 scholars had stripped him of his authority, and Jasmine Crockett had delivered their verdict live on national television. The signatures of 47 professors still burned in the air when Jasmine Crockett reached for her final page. The chamber hushed, a courtroom before the verdict. Mr. Chairman, she began, her voice steady, almost cold. I did not come here today with words alone. I came with action. She lifted a stamped document, its header, Unmistakable House Committee on Ethics. The cameras zoomed in, reporters' jaws dropping as the seal glared back. This morning, Crockett declared, I filed an application with the Ethics Commission. Inside are 43 false statements you made in your official capacity, 16 laws you misread in hearings and on live television, and one ghost case law that you invented from thin air. 43, 16, 1. The record is now preserved for investigation. The chamber exploded. Reporters shouted into phones, live blogs went wild, social media detonated with tags. 43 falsehoods, 16 misreads, ghost case law. Jordan's calm veneer cracked at last. He leaned forward, his voice low but shaking. This is a stunt. A freshman desperate for headlines, Crockett slammed the document onto the desk, the sound ricocheting like a gavel. This is not a stunt. This is accountability. Every number here is documented, sourced, and sworn. 43 lies, 16 distortions, one case that never existed, and you dared to build your authority on it. Gasps tore through the chamber. Even senior Republicans shifted uneasily. Jerry Nadler leaned back, whispering to Zoe Lofgren. She just lit the fuse. Crockett pressed on. You've misled the public, abused your gavel, and undermined this body's integrity. And now, for the first time in 17 years, the Ethics Committee will have the chance to weigh your record under oath. The reporters pounced. CNN's Chiron flared. Crockett files ethics complaint, 43 falsehoods, 16 misreads, one phantom case. MSNBC called it the most direct assault on a sitting chairman in modern memory. Even Fox anchors couldn't contain their disbelief. Jordan sat rigid, the calm mask gone, replaced by thinly veiled anger. The people elected me. They don't care about your paperwork. Crockett's reply was a dagger. The people deserve the truth, and they're finally getting it. The gallery roared with murmurs, some clapping, before being hushed by staffers. Garland sat stone-faced, yet his eyes betrayed the weight of history in the making. Across the nation, Americans scrolled through headlines, stunned. 43 lies, 16 misreadings, one ghost precedent. Numbers so specific, so damning, they left no room for spin. Jasmine Crockett didn't just challenge Jim Jordan, she indicted his entire career. And as the Ethics Commission prepared to open its file, one reality hung over the chamber like a storm cloud. This was no longer a debate, it was the beginning of a trial. The chamber was still vibrating with the numbers. 43 falsehoods, 16 misread laws, one ghost case when Jasmine Crockett rose to her feet. She didn't need to shout. Her voice was measured, her tone steady, each syllable weighted with finality. Mr. Chairman, she began, I've carried clients through trials where every word mattered, where one misplaced phrase could cost a man his life. I know the weight of being wrong. And you, she paused, letting the silence strangle the room, you have never known that weight. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The camera zoomed in on Jordan's face, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the desk like it was a lifeline. Crockett pressed forward. You have never stood before a jury. You have never cross-examined a witness. You have never defended the innocent or prosecuted the guilty. And yet for 17 years, you've lectured this country as though you were the law itself. Her words cut deeper, sharper. Reporters scribbled frantically, their phones buzzing with breaking alerts. CNN's Chiron flashed. Crockett. Jordan never argued a case. She leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes locked on him. Mr. Jordan, you've never argued a case. Don't you dare turn the law into cheap politics. The sentence cracked through the chamber like thunder. The gallery gasped again, some clapping, before being hushed. For a moment, Jordan sat motionless, as though pinned beneath the weight of her words. His face flushed, his composure unraveling. He tried to speak, but the words failed. His lips parted, then closed again. No sound emerging. Crockett's silence after the blow was more devastating than any follow-up. She simply returned to her chair, folded her hands, and waited. The cameras caught everything. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee struck mute on live television, his authority disintegrating in real time. Finally, Jordan pushed back his chair. The scrape against the floor echoed across the chamber. He stood head low and without a word turned his back to the room. Reporters erupted. Shouts filled the chamber. Mr. Jordan, are you resigning? Do you dispute the letter? What about the ethics filing? But he didn't answer. He walked past the cameras, past the stunned lawmakers, past the gallery that had just witnessed the collapse of his credibility. Merrick Garland watched him leave, his expression unreadable. Jerry Nadler whispered to Zoe Lofgren, he won't recover from this. She nodded, eyes wide. Outside, Twitter and cable news detonated in unison. Hashtags spiked. Jordan walkout, never argued, a case Crockett crushes. Clips of the moment played in loops. Crockett's calm words, Jordan's silence, the chair scraping the exit. For 17 years, Jim Jordan had barked, bullied, and blustered his way through hearings. But in one afternoon, Jasmine Crockett stripped it all away, not with volume, not with theatrics, but with facts, precision, and the quiet authority of someone who had carried the true weight of the law. History would remember this moment as the day the gavel slipped from Jordan's hand. The scrape of Jim Jordan's chair still echoed in memory when the outside world erupted. Within minutes of his walkout, the clip was everywhere. By nightfall, it had crossed 10 million views. By the second morning, 25 million. At the 48-hour mark, the counter hit 50 million, a wildfire no network could ignore. CNN plastered it on loop chyrons, blazing Jordan walks out after Crockett's knockout blow. Anderson Cooper leaned forward in disbelief, repeating the words slowly. He never argued a case. Don Lemon called it the most devastating exposure of political fraud in years. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow replayed Crockett's calm dismantling 3 times in a row, marveling at her precision. This wasn't theater, Maddow told viewers. This was accountability delivered with the discipline of a lawyer who knows the stakes of being wrong. Joy Reid added, the chair of judiciary exposed as a hollow man on live TV. Fox News anchors squirmed. Sean Hannity cut the segment short, calling it Democratic grandstanding, but even his viewers noticed the edit. Laura Ingraham hesitated, forced to acknowledge Jordan's silence. Tucker Carlson's replacement on primetime stumbled through excuses, his discomfort plain. For the first time, Fox hosts looked less like defenders and more like reluctant witnesses. The headlines hammered the point. The New York Times, Jordan exposed 17 years of bluster, collapse in seconds. The Washington Post, Crockett delivers legal knockout, Jordan walks out. Even the Wall Street Journal ran a scathing editorial, legal authority cannot be fabricated. Meanwhile, the online tide was merciless. Hashtags that had started as sparks roared into infernos. Jordan walkout. Never argued a case. Crockett crushes. TikTokers remix the clip with boxing bells. Knockout sounds, even scenes from courtroom dramas. Instagram reels layered Crockett's words, "Don't you dare turn the law into cheap politics over thunderous music." The sheer scale of the outrage rattled Washington. By the second day, lawmakers were cornered in hallways, reporters demanding reactions. Repisher Adam Schiff called it the most embarrassing performance I've seen in my time on the Hill. Even Republicans whispered uneasily, one telling Politico off record he should have walked out years ago. Through it all, Crockett stayed silent, issuing no press release, no interviews. Her silence only deepened the impact. She didn't need to repeat the blow. America was replaying it for her 50 million times over. Jordan, on the other hand, vanished. No appearances, no statements, no press availabilities. His absence screamed louder than any denial. Commentators compared it to a boxer refusing to leave the locker room after a knockout. By the end of 48 hours, the verdict was written across every screen in America. Jasmine Crockett had not just won a clash, she had reshaped the battlefield. By the third day, the firestorm was no longer confined to Washington or Twitter feeds. It had spread into the places where middle-aged Americans carried their daily conversations, barbershops, diners, church parking lots, and factory floors. In Columbus, Ohio, a barber named Gerald turned the television in his shop to CNN, replaying the clip on loop. Each time Crockett's voice echoed, "You've never argued a case." The customers erupted with laughter and disbelief. One man slapped the armrest and declared, "That's a Crockett check. Nobody walks away from that." The phrase stuck. In Houston, a group of veterans at a coffee shop leaned across their mugs, replaying the moment on a phone screen. The youngest shook his head. 17 years barking about the Constitution, and he never even stood in court. Another older Marine muttered, "Where I come from, that's stolen valor, pretending to fight battles you never fought." Dallas radio stations picked it up. Callers flooded in, repeating the new phrase. Crockett checks became shorthand for any devastating public takedown. One caller laughed. "My wife Crockett checked me last night about the trash." I had no defense. The term spread like wildfire, bridging divides in a way few political moments ever had. Blue-collar workers in Milwaukee repeated it between shifts. Retirees in Florida chuckled about it after church. Teachers in Chicago used it as slang in staff lounges. MSNBC's Nicole Wallace reported on the phenomenon, noting, "It's not just a viral clip anymore. It's a cultural moment. Jasmine Crockett has entered the American lexicon." Even conservative commentators on talk radio couldn't ignore it. though they tried to spin it. One reluctantly admitted she hit him harder than anyone in years. That was a Crockett check, no doubt. Meanwhile, Jim Jordan's silence only deepened the impression that he'd been bested. Each day he avoided the cameras, the phrase grew louder, repeated like a chorus across the nation. For 17 years, Jordan had projected dominance. In just 3 days, a new image had taken hold. A man exposed, silenced, and walking out while the country laughed and nodded in unison. By the week's end, Crockett checks wasn't just a headline. It was a fixture of American conversation, a phrase that turned one congresswoman's fury into a permanent mark on political culture. And for Jim Jordan, it was the wound that would not close. By the end of the week, the ripple from Crockett checks had reached a place nobody expected inside the Republican caucus itself. What began as murmurs in hallways turned into something louder defections, small at first, but unmistakable. Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska stepped before cameras, his tone grave. "We cannot afford another moment like this. The public expects competence, not showmanship. Maybe it's time lawmakers received real legal training before they lecture the nation about the Constitution." The statement landed like a thunderclap. Within hours, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, a former FBI agent, echoed it. Congress requires financial disclosures, security briefings, and ethics seminars. Why not legal training? Why should the Judiciary Committee itself be immune from the law it claims to defend? Cable news sees the crack in the wall. CNN's Abby Phillip described it as the first Republican revolt. MSNBC's Ari Melber added, Crockett has forced the unthinkable GOP members, openly admitting the chairman's ignorance is a liability. Even conservative outlets faltered. The National Review, long a defender of Jordan, published a blistering editorial, "Ignorance is no defense." Legal literacy should be a minimum standard for those drafting and interpreting law. Crockett, for her part, said little. When pressed by reporters in the Capitol corridors, she offered only one line. "The law is not a prop. If they want training, I'll draft the proposal tomorrow." The effect was electric. Her office phone lines jammed with support. Union leaders, veterans groups, even chambers of commerce called for the measure. The idea of mandatory legal training for lawmakers, once unthinkable, was suddenly mainstream. Meanwhile, Jordan's allies scrambled. Representative Matt Gaetz dismissed it as political theater, but his words rang hollow as more Republicans whispered that the damage was irreversible. One senior GOP aide told Politico she cornered him. "Now we all pay the price if we don't adapt." By the seventh day, the story was no longer whether Jordan could recover. It was whether Congress itself would change, because Jasmine Crockett had forced the question how many lawmakers were making decisions about the law without understanding its weight. And in that silence, a new reality began to settle. Crockett hadn't just exposed Jim Jordan. She had cracked open the foundation of how Congress worked, and for the first time, some Republicans wanted to rebuild it. 3 months had passed, yet Washington still felt the tremors from that single hearing. What began as a humiliation for Jim Jordan had now crystallized into something larger, a doctrine. Reporters across networks were calling it the Crockett Standard. The phrase wasn't coined by Democrats. It was Judge J. Michael Luttig, a conservative icon, who first used it in a televised interview. The Crockett Standard means this: if you cite the law in public office, it had better be accurate, because now someone will check and check ruthlessly. His words ricocheted through editorial pages. Overnight, it became the new litmus test for political credibility. On Capitol Hill, the effect was instant. In Judiciary Committee hearings, where once lawmakers tossed out citations like confetti, a new unease filled the chamber. Members shuffled binders, nervously glancing at staff counsel, before daring to mention case names. Some avoided statutes altogether, choosing instead to speak in vague moral terms. One Politico columnist described it perfectly. It's as if every member of Congress now feels Jasmine Crockett breathing over their shoulder. Jim Jordan, once the swaggering face of legal bluster, was now visibly restrained. Gone were his marathon monologues. When he finally spoke at a subcommittee meeting, he limited himself to broad, almost generic statements about liberty and fairness. Observers noticed what wasn't there: no statutes, no precedent, no constitutional citations. Fox News anchors, once eager to cut to his speeches, live hesitated. His words had lost their sharpness. Meanwhile, Crockett's influence swelled. The Washington Post ran a front-page feature headline, "From Freshman to Enforcer," How Jasmine Crockett redefined legal debate. Inside, reporters traced how she had transformed not just the narrative, but the operating rules of Congress itself. Legal associations across the country adopted the Crockett Standard as shorthand for intellectual rigor. Harvard law professors began using her confrontation as a case study. Law students whispered that if they wanted to survive in the real world, they had to Crockett-proof their arguments. Public reaction was just as fierce. In town halls from Ohio to Texas, citizens demanded accuracy in the way laws were discussed. One Vietnam veteran stood up at a local forum in Columbus, his voice shaking with anger. "I fought for the Constitution. Don't you dare stand here and twist it. If you don't know the law, sit down." His statement went viral, amplifying the sense that ordinary Americans were done with political theater masquerading as jurisprudence. For journalists, the new rule was equally strict. CNN's Donna Bash explained during a panel before Crockett. Legal claims by politicians were often repeated uncritically. After Crockett, no one dares. Every word is fact-checked against the law itself. The pressure spread. Reporters carried annotated constitutions and bookmarked Supreme Court databases on their phones. The irony was stark. Jim Jordan had spent 17 years using the law as a weapon, but it took Jasmine Crockett in a single showdown to force Washington to respect it. Even skeptics admitted as much. Conservative commentator George Will wrote, "Jordan may have survived politically, but his defeat birthed a precedent that will outlast him. Accuracy as accountability." The weight of the Crockett Standard was unmistakable. It wasn't a law passed by Congress. It wasn't a rule imposed by the courts. It was cultural, moral, and unyielding. Once unleashed, it became impossible to reverse, and deep inside the Capitol, as members chose their words with trembling care, one truth was undeniable: the balance of power had shifted. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just checked Jim Jordan. She had checked an entire institution. 1 year later, the shockwave had not faded, it had institutionalized. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Jim Jordan was no longer just a viral clip. It had become curriculum. In classrooms across America, professors dimmed the lights, played the footage, and told their students, "This is what truth under fire looks like." At Harvard Law, first-year students in constitutional law were greeted not with Marbury v. Madison, but with Jasmine Crockett holding up statutes in front of the Judiciary Committee. Dean Martha Minow called it the most visceral lesson in legal accountability this generation will see. Her lecture drew audible gasps from incoming students who realized law was not an abstract puzzle, but a weapon wielded in real time on live television, where one wrong phrase could collapse an empire. The American Bar Association moved quickly too. At its annual conference in Chicago, President Deborah Enochs Ross declared, "The Crockett Exchange will be archived as mandatory study for continuing legal education. It is not just law, it is civic duty made visible." Judges from across the country rose in applause. Even retired Justice Stephen Breyer, long known for his measured tone, called it a civic earthquake, the moment the public realized law cannot be bent without breaking trust. Meanwhile, in law schools from Yale to the University of Houston, students dissected every frame. They charted Crockett's calm body language against Jordan's flush denial. They analyzed the missing clause in Brandenburg v. Ohio, the fabricated Thompson v. Louisiana, and the misreading of Bauer 1512. But what resonated most was the human element. Professor Lawrence Tribe reminded his class, "It wasn't the case law that destroyed Jordan. It was the courage of one woman refusing to let fiction stand unchecked." In high schools, civics teachers found the clip irresistible. Instead of dull textbooks, teenagers now watched Jasmine facing down Jordan and debated the meaning of accountability. In Des Moines, an AP government teacher told reporters her students spontaneously erupted into applause during the screening. One student said, "I thought Congress was fake wrestling." She made it real. But perhaps the most dramatic ripple came outside the classroom. Veterans groups, labor unions, and grassroots organizations embraced the moment as proof that ordinary people could demand integrity. At a VFW hall in Pennsylvania, an aging Marine stood to speak. "If she can call out lies in Congress, then damn it, we can call out lies at City Hall." His words were met with cheers that shook the room. Not everyone celebrated. On conservative talk, radio hosts fumed. Mark Levin sneered, "They're teaching kids to worship Crockett like she's the high priestess of law." But their outrage only amplified the spread. Every complaint became another headline. Right-wing fury over Crockett lesson goes viral. In the digital age, hashtags had staying power. Crockett Standard trended again when Georgetown Law uploaded a public lecture titled "The Day Law Fought Back." Within hours, it had 1 million views. Parents shared it with their children, workers with their colleagues, pastors with their congregations. The narrative transcended politics; it became morality made visible. Even Jordan could not escape the shadow. Reporters chased him through Capitol hallways with a single question. "Congressman, do you regret citing cases that didn't exist?" His silence spoke louder than any denial. And so what began as a fiery exchange in one committee room evolved into something far larger, a civic touchstone. Every time the clip played in classrooms, conferences, living rooms, it carried the same haunting reminder. Accuracy was not optional. Accountability was not partisan. It was a new American lesson, written in sweat silence and one devastating phrase. This case law does not exist. By the time the first anniversary of the hearing arrived, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman from Texas. She had become a symbol. Networks replayed her words like scripture, and across America, her declaration rang out in classrooms, churches, and coffee shops. The truth has no party color. It has only one value: justice. The line was born during a live interview with MSNBC's Rachel Maddow. Crockett had been asked if her takedown of Jordan was partisan theater. Her eyes narrowed, her tone sharpened. The truth has no party color. It has only one value: justice. And when politicians lie about the law, every American Republican, Democrat, Independent pays the price. Maddow leaned back, stunned, whispering, "That's a doctrine, not a soundbite." The clip detonated online. Within hours, "Truth has no party" trended worldwide. For middle-aged Americans who had seen Watergate, Iran-Contra, and January 6th, it felt like the rebirth of civic morality. In small towns across Ohio and veterans' halls across Pennsylvania, in Texas, barbecue joints, the line was repeated like a vow. Even within Congress, the phrase carved deep fractures. Senator Mitt Romney quietly praised it as a necessary recalibration. Representative Liz Cheney, already an outcast, tweeted simply, "Justice has no party." Crockett is right. Their words ignited fresh outrage on the far right, but the dam had cracked. Inside the Judiciary Committee, Jordan tried to reclaim ground. During one tense exchange, he attempted to frame Crockett's rising influence as partisan manipulation. "This isn't about truth. It's about Democrats rewriting the playbook," he said, gripping his microphone with white knuckles. But Crockett did not flinch. She leaned forward, her voice low but cutting. 17 years, Mr. Jordan. 17 years of citing laws you never practiced. You called lies arguments and fiction precedent. This isn't my playbook, it's the Constitution's. You never read it in full, and America deserves better." The room froze. Reporters scribbled furiously. CNN pushed an alert within minutes. Crockett to Jordan: "America deserves better." The cultural impact was impossible to contain. At the University of Michigan, law students staged a mock trial titled "The Crockett Standard," reenacting her confrontation to teach new students the perils of false citations. The National Bar Association held a symposium under the banner "Truth Beyond Party." Justice Sonia Sotomayor addressed the crowd, praising Crockett for embodying what the court often lacked the courage to say plainly when the law was being twisted. But the most searing reaction came from the public itself. In Cleveland, a retired steelworker named Harold Price stood outside his union hall and told a local reporter, "Jordan lied to us for years and we clapped because it sounded good. Crockett showed us the bill we've been paying." Enough is enough. His voice cracked as he spoke, echoing the generational betrayal felt by millions who realized how long they had been misled. On Fox News, the backlash was ferocious. Tucker Carlson snarled that Crockett was a radical disguised as a reformer, but the attacks rang hollow. Even some of Carlson's viewers admitted on call-in lines that they checked the statutes Crockett had cited, and she was right. The truth was harder to bury now. In that atmosphere of upheaval, one thing became clear. Jasmine Crockett had not merely dismantled Jim Jordan's arguments, she had redrawn the moral map of political discourse. For every supporter who whispered her name in gratitude, There was a lawmaker forced to check their words twice before speaking. And as cameras captured her walking calmly out of another packed hearing, the phrase still lingered in the air like thunder after a storm. The truth has no party color. It has only one value: justice. This moment shows us that truth has no party, no disguise. It is the lifeline of justice. In our own lives, we may never sit in Congress, but every day we face choices to let falsehood slide or to stand for what is right. So I ask you, when it is your turn, will you defend the truth even if your voice trembles? This video is created for educational and inspirational purposes under fair use, not to defame or attack any individual. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. It means the world. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share so more voices can join this journey. Until next time, stay strong, stay awake, and I'll see you in the next video.